So now we're going to get into the farmer panel. So we have here Jean-Paul is going to be joining us again, and then we have Aaron Munzer, Rick Pedersen, and Josh Jurs, and Crystal Stewart is going to be moderating. So would you like to explain a bit how it's going to work, Crystal?
Yeah, so we're going to spend the next hour with the panel discussing soil health. In order to make this a more engaging and useful panel for everybody, we're going to have questions rolling throughout the entire hour, but we're going to focus our conversation a little bit throughout that hour. So we've got three main topics that we're planning to discuss. We're going to start off with discussion of cover crops that the different farms are using. Then we'll move into a discussion of reduced tillage. And finally, we'll focus on organic amendments. So if you had specific questions that deal with one of those areas, what we'll do is we'll ask the panel some curated discussion questions. And then after each of those, Haley's going to be monitoring the chat box and she'll report back any questions to the farmer panel, and we'll answer those before we move on to the next curated discussion question. But before we do that, we wanted to take the opportunity to meet all of the farmers. So each of the farms is going to tell us the name, farm name, and location, followed by the size of the operation and what they're growing, and then what sorts of soil health practices they're implementing. And they're going to do all that in a minute. Not really, you can take 2 minutes. But we'll start off hearing a little bit about Aaron's farm, and then we'll go from there.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Aaron Munzer from Plowbreak Farm. We're in Hector, New York, just outside of Ithaca. We're probably the smallest farm here by a margin. We grow about 6 acres of vegetables a year, plus an acre of asparagus. And we have 7 high tunnels. I think the last time I did something like this, we had 3, but now we have 7 30 by 96 high tunnels that we grow on throughout the year, except for January and February when we sort of take a little break. But half of our income comes from there. So it tells you how important it is to us. Our main crops are tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers from the tunnels, and then asparagus out in the field, salad mix in the winter months, and a smattering of other vegetables. We sell to primarily chefs and wholesalers, although this year it's a little different. We expanded our smaller CSA to 120 families because of the pandemic, and it's been a really tough year for us because of localized drought, but switching to the CSA was probably for the best because it, with slightly lower crop quality and reduced variety, it's been easier to manage that with the CSA as opposed to going through wholesale marketing, even though we are still wholesaling quite a bit. And is this just an introduction, or would you also like me to go into the questionnaire, or do we switch off that later?
Let's do the intro first, and then we'll,
okay.
Did you want to share your website, or are you happy just letting
I can do that during my period, it's plowbreakfarm.com if people want to check it out, but yeah.
Great, thanks, Aaron. How about Dave? Or Dave, sorry, Rick. You're not Rick.
Go ahead.
I keep thinking you're Dave Pedersen and you're Rick Pedersen.
Okay, so we're in Seneca Castle, New York, which is upstate central New York. And we grow asparagus, kale, cabbage, squash, sweet corn, field corn, soybeans, wheat, rye, hops, and Romanesco. And all of that is organic except for the hops and the Romanesco. Soils are predominantly Honeoye Lima, but we farm a 10-mile radius, scattered fields here and there. So we have all kinds of soils. There's heavy silts to very light, I call it almost beach sand, where we plant the asparagus. We're predominantly wholesale and processing vegetables. And then several things are niche markets, like the rye, the wheat. I guess those are the only real niche markets, but we rely on Hispanic workers to plant, maintain, and harvest it all. And we have hydrocooling and cooling and no trucks. I can't stand trucks, so I love to hire those. I guess that about covers the gist of it.
Thanks, Rick. How about Josh?
I'm Josh from Krehers Poultry Farms. We farm organically about 5,000 acres. Vegetables are beets, red table beets, some green beans, some winter squash. We've grown peas before. A lot of cannon factory stuff we kind of get into and get back out of pretty quick. And we also, we've also got about 3 million chickens. So we raise grain for those birds, corn, soybeans, wheat. We're quickly transitioning from wheat to triticale. In our rotation, we plant after soybeans, so the triticale seems to be a little bit better fit than the wheat. Do quite a bit of cover cropping. One thing we're pretty excited about this year, we've leased a soil warrior, so we're doing some more minimal tilling or strip tilling. We're giving that a whirl. So, but that's about how Krehers is. We also have a compost and fertilizer operation, which I assume a lot of people are aware of. That's about it for us.
Oh, that's all?
That's all.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Jean Paul, you want to introduce yourself to the people that were not on the keynote?
Sure. I'll share the screen if I'm. Let me see. Share some pictures. So I think I'll beat Aaron with the smallest farm. Crystal and I grow about 3 acres of vegetables, 1 acre of mixed vegetables, and 1 acre of sea garlic and an acre of cabbage. And this is the acre, or a part of the picture of the 1 acre is a long field, narrow field. And then here is the seed garlic. We're focusing on seed garlic. And on the right here is where we are rolling and crimping triticale and veg for the cabbage. This is a slide still from last year. We expanded by about 50% of production compared to last year. We're in the middle of it right now. We're pretty busy. We just got the garlic crop in. It's being cured in the greenhouse. And and that's what we do.
Great. So that's all of our panelists. And we'll share things as appropriate throughout the questions. How about that? Sound like a plan? So the first questions that we want to focus on during this discussion: how long you've implemented cover crops on the farm, and what types of cover crops you're using and why.
There we go. We started very small. We started with like a 1.5 acres and a rototiller and a farmer who plowed our field for us. So at that point, we didn't do very much, but as we got tractor equipment, we got more sophisticated about cover cropping. So for about 5 years, we've had a cover crop system where we will put all of our early crops, once they've come out of the field, into oats and peas in order to get the most biomass out of that. So those go in where we are sometime between now and early September. And then for our late fall crops, winter squash, onions, things like that, we will, once they've been harvested, we'll put those into rye or rye and vetch. And then that'll get plowed in the spring for the next crop. And then we try to leave one of our 3/4 acre blocks bare fallowed over the winter, just to make prep easier in the spring. for certain crops, but that's our basic cover crop schedule. We've also experimented with sunflowers and different mixes. And then one other cover crop that we do that's slightly unusual is that in our acre of asparagus, we use a densely planted cover crop of soybeans after harvest to keep the weeds down and provide nitrogen for the next year's crop, which seems to work pretty well. And this year we didn't get it in because of the drought. But in past years, it's been pretty effective in doing what we wanted to do for the crop. Yeah.
Nice. That's really interesting. Thank you. All right, let's turn it over to Rick.
So over the years, I started farming in 1981. So back then it was all conventional. But even then I was using quite a bit of cover crops, which was kind of pioneering. Not many people were doing cover crops back then, but I've tried just about everything over the years. Have used mustard, and that's great. I was using it as a biofumigant, but I just couldn't get enough spring growth out of it to make it viable to plow down or till in prior to especially bean crops for soil pathogens. So I haven't used mustard now in a while. I use rye and wheat that just comes from my own crop that I clean. We have a fanning mill here on the farm, so we clean all our own grain before we use it as a cover crop, so we know we're getting rid of the weed seeds. Used to plant certified, conventional. I'd harvest my own wheat and get it treated at the local mill. They did not clean it, look clean, but there was still thistle seeds in it. And so I was spreading thistle seeds when I was planting without knowing it. But now that I clean my own, the thistles are starting to go away. Austrian winter peas, rye grass, clover. Those are my primary, along with the wheat and the rye. And I use blends of those. About a third of the farm is in the small grains. All of that gets underseeded with clover. And then if there's anything that doesn't get a cover crop on it, but which is harvested soon enough, then we make mixes that we do, and we fall till those in. We're also underseeding, interseeding field corn. I've been doing that for 3 years to try to have something green there for when you take the corn off and to come on earlier in the spring. I'm not really satisfied with it because obviously the corn gives us so much competition that it doesn't get going as strong as you'd like, sometimes better than others. And another thing that we do on some of our soybeans, if that ground isn't going to a small grain, then I'll spread a small grain over the top at what we call yellow leaf. So just before the beans fully mature, you spread the cover crop, which would be rye, spelt, wheat, whatever, right over the top of the beans. And then as the leaves die off and fall on,
Is Rick frozen for everybody else, or is it just me?
Everybody.
Yep, he's frozen.
It's usually me that freezes. Oh, you're back. I think.
am I still there?
Yes, we are now.
When I was first going with the conventional crops, I was using a lot of vetch, and I love that crop for a cover crop. Lots of nitrogen, and it's easy to get rid of the green stuff. However, now I curse it every year. I haven't grown vetch in probably, I don't even know, 15 years probably, and vetch is a major problem in my small grains. So that was part of the reason why we got the fanning mill, was so we could get the vetch in an indent cleaner to get the vetch out of our rye and our wheat. So if you're into small grains, don't let vetch come anywhere near your farm. And then
I
I
have a
use,
question from
Yep.
the chat box. For the asparagus, do the soybeans mature? Do you harvest them?
that's sort of two questions. So there was an asparagus question and a soybean question. My soybeans are taken to harvest, and most of them go for tofu.
I think it might have been referring to our asparagus because we do the soybeans underneath. Those are they're allowed to mature because we're just going to plant soybeans there next year, and they're not really effective. They don't interfere with the asparagus production. So I'll flail mow them in November whenever I flail mow the asparagus stalks. So they're gone, and the beans are essentially left. But I don't really find a lot of germination in the spring for them, so I imagine they don't overwinter very well. But that's just our experience so far.
I'll continue a little bit here. In the hops, I have that middle rows are Dutch white clover and a little bit of rye grass that's basically perennial. And then we mow it 2 or 3 times a year, keep the weeds from coming back. And also it gives us support for the equipment for harvest and spraying. And then I'll spread tillage radish over that at harvest time so that I get some kind of penetration into the row centers from the tillage radish. The rye grass is pretty much used underneath the field corn, clover ryegrass mix. The ryegrass is our own. We had a ryegrass cover crop one year, and then it was a very, very wet year, so we never were able to farm that ground. It became fallow, and then that fall I planted wheat, and that was a mistake because then the ryegrass became a weed in the wheat. It didn't affect the yield that much. It was just a little harder to harvest. However, then we were able to separate the ryegrass seed out of the wheat. And so that's what I've been using for cover crop seed for the last couple of years. So we try to get almost every acre covered with something growing in order to maintain the soil biology 12 months of the year.
Nice. That's great. So I do want to just mention that we have questions coming in, but we're going to hold all the questions until we hear from each panelist, and then we'll loop through and cycle back through those just so everybody knows. All right. And then Jean-Paul, you did. No, we did. We're all good. Sorry. Can't do 2 things at once. All right. So now we'll circle back to that last question here. And it's another one from Elizabeth Henderson. Oh,
yeah. Sorry, we had a follow-up to the question about the asparagus and the soybeans. Why do you not harvest them green as edamame?
Because they're a field soybean. I could, but honestly, it's just another thing to do. I'm sure you could do it that way, but also they're pretty densely planted. We drill them in, and it's, I think, dense enough that it would just be difficult to pick. When we've sold edamame before, we've sold it by the plant, and we've spaced them out further. So it's quite a possibility, and it would be an opportunity to sell your cover crop, but we've just never gotten around to it.
Thank you. Yeah. And I did leave Josh out. I thought I had. I'm just losing my marbles on which question I'm on. So Josh, could you, and Jean-Paul, could you finish up with your thoughts on the cover crop?
So the farm transitioned to organic in 1999, or started transitioning, and medium red clover has been kind of the standard cover crop since then. Probably the last 5 or 6 years, we've really expanded our cover crop program from just a simple, cross-seeded red clover. We still use red clover, not a lot. We use some crimson clover and Berseem clover. We found in the spring, if you get a wet spring, the red clover just goes bananas in the spring. It just, we can't, there's so much biomass, we can't stay ahead of it. So we've kind of gone away from that. Not that that's the bad thing, it just overloads your plate in the spring. It's funny that Aaron mentioned soybeans. So last year with a really wet spring and the prevented planted acres, we had all these tons of soybean seeds that we couldn't return. So last year, all our prevented planted acres got cover crop soybeans drilled at like 300,000 to 400,000 plants per acre. And actually this year, we liked the results so well, we did some of the same this year for erosion and nitrogen fixing and seed that we couldn't return. We always buy extra seed and what do you do with it? We can't afford to feed it to chickens. We might as well use it for a cover crop. And then we've also, before all our vegetables, we do some peas and rye, peas and oats. But we like buckwheat. We found that following buckwheat, the weed suppression is super. We also use Mexican folks for hand weeding in our vegetables, our beets and our snap beans primarily. And it just made their job so much easier. So that's why we've become big buckwheat fans. We've got some fields where we've had bindweed issues and we really intensively till and cover crop those. That's been mustard, followed by a deep ripper pass, and then buckwheat, followed by a deep ripper pass, and then oats, followed by a deep ripper pass. And that's been pretty successful at managing bindweed. We took nearly 100 acres that was unfarmable and turned it into productive farmland again.
Wow.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's remarkable about the bindweed.
Yeah, that's the only thing we found that is remotely successful with bindweed.
100 acres of bindweed sounds like my nightmare. So
yeah,
I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Yep. Down at our farm, we've got a farm just outside of Dansville, where we struggle with slope, and we're kind of flatland farmers from upstate New York, and we got this farm in Dansville, and the hills have been really a challenge for us. So we've done a lot of cover cropping down there for erosion more than weed suppression. That's kind of what we do.
Great, thanks, Josh. John Paul.
Yeah, I'll be speaking a little bit from two different perspectives because I'm transitioning out of a larger vegetable farm, which is Roxbury Farm, to a much smaller vegetable farm, which is Philia Farm. So, and it's interesting, if you are working in the context of a large mechanized farm, your selection of cover crops is going to be quite differently. The uses for the cover crops is going to be quite differently, as we already hear from Rick, who was able to combine some of them. So, nevertheless, I would say that probably the number one cover crop over the years being utilized is rye and vetch. That generally does not get followed by a vegetable crop in the rotation. While if we want to follow vegetables in the rotation, usually oats and peas as an overwintering cover crop. The third one that we utilize is probably, and utilized within the context of Roxbury Farm with having mechanized equipment to be able to incorporate them, have been Crotalaria, sorghum, and sunflowers. The fourth one in popularity would be bell beans, oats, and peas, preceding all the crucifera or the brassica family, like the cabbage, cauliflower, and broccoli, providing them with fertility. I like bell beans a lot to mix that in with the oats and peas. I didn't mention it in my talk, but that was also, again, one of those things that was kind of like by accident. We grew fava beans as a cash crop, and we followed that with broccoli. And wherever we did not follow broccoli after fava beans, they were not as prolific and not as healthy. So there's nothing scientific about it. There was anecdotal. We just thought that the broccoli is a lot healthier after bell beans. And we still find that. If we mix in some bell beans with the oats and peas, they do a lot better after incorporation. But I also like, as some people say, I love buckwheat as a crop in between a spring and a fall crop. Great wheat suppressant. And we have definitely worked with mustard as a biofumigant, especially in the context of the Hudson Valley Farmer, where we had Phytophthora. It doesn't eliminate it, but it greatly reduces the soil pathogens in the soil. So, but I agree with Rick that sometimes it's hard to get enough biomass to work under in time to actually follow that with a cash crop.
Great, thank you. So that's a tremendous diversity of cover crops, very exciting. I'm going to pass it back to Haley to pull some questions out of the chat box.
Great. So we have a question directed to the more agronomic side, either Josh or Rick probably. And the question is, have you seen any allelopathic effects of a cover crop on a cash crop? And if so, how do you avoid allelopathic effects of some cover crops?
Not really, although they do talk about rye being a problem, but you typically don't let the rye become old enough for it to develop the allelopathy that it's noted for. So we grow rye for a grain that we harvest, but that's underseeded with clover. Nothing comes back on that field until the following spring. If there's rye that I'm tilling in, we try to get that mowed sometimes twice before we plant, so we don't let it get to that woody or stemmy like rye can get. We knock it down when it's still vegetative.
I agree with Rick. We do similar. No matter how busy we are, what we're doing, we don't let it go. You'll go out and mow in the rain if you have to, so it doesn't get to that point.
Great, thank you. We have a question for Rick. What was the method and timing of overseeding rye and soybeans?
So that goes on at what I called yellow leaf. So that's going to be late September, early October, just as they're starting to turn color. And that's providing your beans aren't too big that you can still drive through them without causing damage. And then that's to get up above them, I use a 3-point hitch herd spreader, HURD, or Vicon would work also.
Okay. Next question. Does the vegetation between the hops create a disease concern? A local grower cultivates between his because he was concerned with disease from higher humidity.
I have not found that to be true. Everybody's got a different way of doing things. I like having the sod in the middle, so to support the sprayer. If you're bare ground and it rains on the soil that I've got it on, then we'd have ruts, and your ruts would be cutting into the roots of the hop vines, and that would be worse. Plus soil compaction, the sod holds up your equipment for less soil compaction. As far as the humidity, there isn't too much in the row. Of course, this is not organic, it's conventional hops. So we do spray the row centers. So other than hops and weeds, because I've got hops that are over 20 years old, perennials become a problem. But as far as the humidity, I haven't found that to be a problem.
A question for Josh. Can you restate the rotation of cover crops you use to combat bindweed?
So we started in the spring, and I say spring, late May, early June we've got a Kraus Dominator, which is a hybrid chisel plow. We run it just as deep as we can, 16, 18 inches deep, as much horsepower as we've got to pull it. We followed that with mustard. We let the mustard establish for probably 30 to 40 days. We followed it with another extremely deep whipping pass in the opposite direction. We followed that with buckwheat. Same thing, left it for about 25 to 30 days. Another deep whipping pass, and then just broadcast oats and left it to overwinter with the dead oats. You know, the winter killed the oats off. And then in the spring, we planted another buckwheat cover crop, and then followed that with red table beets the following year.
Wow, that's great. Thank you. Just for the sake of time, I'm actually going to move us on to the next area of discussion so that we can get to all three areas of discussion. I think that we actually did a good job of touching through all the different aspects of cover crops that we were going to talk about without having to ask the questions. So we'll pivot into the no-till discussion. And I'm going to try to combine two of these questions a little bit. So I'm going to combine the first two questions here, and we'll start off by asking Rick, do you use reduced tillage, and how has it affected your cover crop management? And related to that, do you find that cover cropping has made it easier or harder to reduce tillage?
I guess I would have to say harder, except if you're set up for it with a crimper and you're doing something like dry beans that plant later into June, it would be more likely to be viable for the crops I grow. The no-till would be tough. I have experimented or collaborated with other farmers with no-till squash. Didn't work very well. I know there's guys that are doing no-till soybeans into rolled rye. Depends somewhat on what your soil types are and how your ground dries out in the spring. If you've got more silt or clays in your soils, then no-till becomes more difficult. So I don't do any no-till.
All right. How about you, Josh?
We've got a couple different scenarios with that. So we've crimped rye and planted squash or pumpkins in it. The one thing I can say is you've got to be ready. If the rye's not good enough, it's never going to work. So be ready when you crimp it, if it's not good enough, to fit it and farm it with conventional tillage practices. Is my only advice for the crimp rye. And we've never tried, I know Klaus Martins has been relatively successful with soybeans. We've never been successful. We haven't tried a lot. It's mostly been for squash. So corn this year, for the first year ever, I would say we're 90%. Not no-till. We don't do any no-till, just minimal till. So our old practices were moldboard plow almost every acre. You know, followed by conventional cull mulch, cultivate, pick stones, field cultivate again, plant. We've bought, I think I can share my screen here. This year we leased a soil warrior, and that's a picture of it for people that aren't familiar with it. So we still till. We planted a cover crop, and we also have a speed tiller or a high-speed disc. We go in and high-speed disc the whole field, and then run the soil warrior, which we also put down our pelletized chicken manure with the soil warrior, and then plant right into that. So we don't have, this is just a file photo, not one of ours. We don't have this nice cover crop still in between because we need to be able to cultivate. So that's our first year, and so far the results look pretty promising. We'll see in the fall, but it looks like it's going to be really successful.
Thanks for sharing. I really appreciate that you're highlighting the fact that a lot of farmers are moving more towards reduced tillage rather than no tillage. That, you know, finding some level of reduction improves our soil health. And so it's good to hear about some of these ways that people are doing that too.
A little bit selfishly, I mean, it's great for the soil to reduce the tillage, but quite frankly, we can't find labor to get all this tillage done, and labor is so costly that if we can reduce, you know, 1 or 2 passes, that opens things up a lot. And also the benefit is it's healthier for our soils. We generally have relatively healthy soils, but this is making things that much better.
Nice, thank you. Okay, jump to Jean-Paul and then to Aaron.
Yeah, I had quite a platform, you know, half an hour ago or 45 minutes ago to talk about that. But yeah, I agree with what has been said so far, is that for organic farmers, no-till is really difficult and challenging, but minimum tillage is definitely an option. I've been doing this right now, trying to roll and crimp both a legume and a cereal, or just a legume all by itself, in order to have a successful crop. The biggest problem we have to overcome is weed control, and that just means that we have to do quite a bit of tillage the previous year. So addressing this whole thing about labor that Josh referred to is that if we can find a way to do our field tillage the previous year, successfully plant a mixed cover crop, a cereal and a legume, whereby we get the right density, and we can successfully kill it to plant our vegetable crops, at least for a narrow part of the season, right? It's only for a few successions. It worked well for a few plantings of sweet corn, your fall brassicas, and definitely it could work well for pumpkins, but so not for your whole range. We still have a lot of work to do when it comes to, you know, finding out what the right methods are for weed control there. And anybody who wants to try that, I would say, if you're able to do it on a bit of a larger scale and you can afford one of those Hinniger's high residue cultivators, I would highly recommend that, because you need to be able to rescue your crop if it doesn't work out. But we've seen so much good results, especially water holding capacity of the soil, when we do all our tillage the previous year, roll and crimp our crop and then plant it, that I think it's worth to keep trying. Plus that, you know, in the context of climate change, having the soil exposed during severe thunder showers in July or June, it's worth that we keep working at it and plugging away at it. But I haven't completely figured it out yet.
Yeah, thank you. So now we're going to pivot to Aaron, who is going in the different direction with scale. And it seems like one of your primary reduced tillage tools might be tarping at this point. So maybe we can incorporate that into the conversation.
Yeah, it's certainly not appropriate on scale. And honestly, it's a little bit inappropriate for our size at several acres. I would say that we generally use it only for direct seeded, dense planted crops where we just couldn't get a crop out of it if it had weeds. So baby salad mix, baby root vegetables, basically all of our small brassicas. And it's worked pretty well for that. But again, we're only doing maybe a half acre at a time in a tarp. So it's a lot of labor, probably just as much labor to do the tillage of that plot to get the same result. And we also do, so we do all our normal tillage, probably minus a pass or two with the Perfecta cultivator. Then we tarp for about a month to germinate all the weeds, and then we just seed right into those. Generally, I do raised beds now with that because it just makes the soil a little bit nicer to seed into. So we're losing a pass or so, and I think there are other benefits too. But it's reduced tillage. It's for sure. There's still a lot of tillage involved. But I would say from the small scale perspective, we switched from moldboard plow plus rototiller to chisel plow plus Perfecta. field cultivator a while ago, and that's been great. And it's still, you're still making passes and breaking up soil, but doing it in a slightly less destructive way. Yeah, so that's been helpful on our smaller end.
Nice, thank you. I see that we have had a question in the chat box. Should we address that, Haley?
Yeah, I can go ahead and ask it. So for Jean-Paul, you said that your soil organic matter capped out at 3.5%. Is there a way to push it past that limit?
Many more neutral years. For one thing, soil type is a big factor there. If you're working on a silt loam, it has been difficult to raise the organic matter at that particular soil type as well. It burns up pretty quickly when you do tillage. It really depends on the particular situation. And I would love to actually hear from the other panelists to what extent, you know, they have been able on their soil type and also their experience with different soil types where they peaked. Because I worked on different soil types where I'm on a soil type right now at Philia Farm where we are at 5% and with very little effort. So, but on the previous land, which was a alluvial soil, it just didn't go up any further. So any of the other panelists want to respond to this?
I would agree with soil type. Like similar to you, we've got soil that we struggle for a 2.5, and we've got soil that we don't farm any different. It's a 4.8. And it's effortless. I mean, I feel like everything we do is at least maintaining and not, you know, reducing our organic matter. But I can't say that we specifically go out to try, because like I said, it's so difficult, and we just like to keep all our farming practices so we're maintaining or increasing and not reducing.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that this reduced tillage will probably, you know, I anticipate maybe a 5-year we'll notice a difference. I don't think we'll see anything much before that, but.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that question? Okay, that's perfect. Before we move on from this reduced till question, were there any pieces of equipment that folks wanted to share that you're using or techniques that relate to reduced tillage that you wanted to share before we move on? And I'll just open that to whoever might have anything. We'll just head right into organic amendments.
So we kind of have, we purchased a weed zapper this year, and it's kind of related in the fact that with the reduced tillage, if we struggle to tine weed effectively or cultivate effectively, that's kind of a rescue tool for us. It's new this year. Results look pretty promising so far, but it's a little too early to say. It struggles a little bit with grasses, does better on broadleafs. So we're stay tuned for more results on that, I would say.
Nice. And if folks haven't heard of the weed zappers yet, Google that afterwards. It's fascinating, and you want to see a video. So yep. Check it out. All right.
We use flamers, and also we have a weed puller. And our rescue is a Kinsey cultivator. They'll go through anything. But since we've gotten to be using the flamer a little bit more, we're using the Kinsey less. Especially now, after 2 months of no rain at all, now it won't stop. We're getting close to 7 inches of rain here in the last couple of weeks. And so we went from dry where the weeds weren't germinating to, okay, they germinated and now I can't do anything about them because it's so wet we can't cultivate. So we're out doing all the rescue stuff now.
Yeah. All right. Let's go ahead and pivot to organic amendments. So where are we at now? We're going to start off with Josh this time. And that feels kind of fun. Josh, what kind of amendments do you use at the Krehers farm?
Let me put on my Krehers compost hat.
I swear I didn't set that up on purpose.
We primarily obviously use our own chicken compost. We were partnered with an outfit from Arizona in a baby leaf operation. We ran in conjunction with them more of a traditional complete composted product that we used on our baby leaf, vegetables. But all of our, beets and everything else all gets Krehers compost.
And how do you determine your rates?
We're a KFO operation, so mostly ACS determines our rates. That's always a balancing act. And we do, because the farm's been in business for 97 years this year. So it's been getting chicken litter and chicken manure spread for a long time. So we are restricted by some phosphorus issues. And we've done some different trials in that, just with other product, outside product, composted product. We're going, I can't tell you the name of the product, but we're going to foliar feed some of our beets with a liquid product out of Arizona. I can't tell you the brand. I think it's a 1000 soy-based product, I believe.
Interesting. I'm going to pivot to Jean-Paul and ask you the same question. What are your organic amendments? What rates are you using, and how do you determine those rates?
Well, I mean, the ideal fertilizer I always think is cow manure. If you have access to it, right? If you compost it well and can burn the weed seeds out of it. But we have used a lot of Krehers products, and the way that we address the nitrogen question, because again, when you are doing your nutrient management that Josh is referring to, and you see that in order to get your nitrogen levels at the right level, you tend to put too much phosphorus on based on the composted chicken manure. So we were able to get 50% of our nitrogen needs out of our cover crops and green manures. So by doing that, we didn't have to rely on some very expensive and also difficult to apply nitrogen products that are out there. So that's been very simple. Combination of cow manure, composted poultry manure, and green manures. And of course, boron. I should not forget the fact that we are applying boron, and the way that we applied it was through a sprayer, solubor in a sprayer, and then apply it liquid, depending on the crop, anywhere between 1 to 3 pounds of actual boron per acre, because we were very low in boron.
We do the same with boron, apply liquid with a sprayer, generally on our beet crop. And the rotation beets gives us
soil amendment, and sometimes also as a foliar. Boron and sulfur, both of them tend to leach, and so it's you can't put on a slug because it's going to go away. So you just put on a little bit every year.
Yeah, absolutely. Little plug for the Reiner's lab at Cornell. They're doing a lot of surveys of sulfur throughout the state, and they're finding a lot of areas are a lot lower than they think. So that's an amendment that people are definitely moving towards. Yeah. I'm going to pivot to Aaron, ask you the same question.
Up until this year, we've been using about 5 tons per acre of Krehers mixed with composted horse manure, which I like when that's mixed pretty heavily with bedding. It's a lighter product, and it also balances out the Krehers because we are spreading in a manure spreader. So it's not an exact science at that point. That's worked out really well for us. But again, our phosphorus levels are getting a little high, and our boron and zinc and whatnot are a little low. So after about 5 years here, we're going to either switch to a Fertrell product, or Josh was just telling me about a product that Krehers makes that actually adds in those micronutrients to the chicken compost. So something there, I think on a smaller scale, I don't have a sprayer, and it would be a big expense to buy a sprayer just to get boron on. So we'll probably go the route of putting it on with our fertility. But in general, that's what we've done. Also, we have 6 high tunnels, so fertility in there is completely different. In those, we don't let any phosphorus come in unless we have to, because it really builds up in there pretty quickly. We fertilize with soybean or feather meal, depending on the year and the price. And then often we'll add in municipal leaf compost, actually, because it's very low fertility, very low in phosphorus and things like that, and pretty high in organic matter. So we're basically just trying to push as much organic matter in there without the resulting high fertility. We also just dug a really large pond, and I'm taking all that topsoil and putting it in our greenhouses too. So that's not an option that everyone just has, but we now have 1,000 tons of topsoil just sitting in a big heap. So hopefully I can use that to good effect. So it seems weird to fertilize with topsoil, but in a high tunnel, you really start to develop some issues around year 5, and swapping out soil or adding in more soil with low fertility can really be beneficial. Oh, and we're fertigating too. That's another thing. We don't do it in the field often, but every week the tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers get, let's see, for 6 high tunnels, it's like 12 pounds of Chilean nitrate and sulfate of potash with micronutrients, and I add in citric acid to balance the pH, or to actually to acidify the soil in there, because the soil pH rises in high tunnels. One of our high tunnels is 7.7 right now, so you can really get too high quickly, and you've got to make sure that your levels are good with that as well, because there's not a leaching effect because of the plastic cover.
Absolutely. So I'm going to pivot to Haley. Oh, wait, no, I'm going to pivot back to Rick, because Rick kind of answered, but maybe there was more to your answer about the amendments question.
So every field is soil tested, and then I make my own fertilizer here at the farm. So I have blends sometimes per field, per crop, actually every field. The nitrogen comes basically from the cover crops and the manure. And then if I need to supplement the phosphorus, we use Calphos. And if I need to supplement the potassium, we use SOP. Boron and sulfur almost on everything every year. Some of that sulfur comes from gypsum. We also use Krehers, quite a bit of it mulch that we spread on ahead of time. And we also blend our own 2x2 planter fertilizer with the base being the Krehers fertilizer. Then we use biologicals like Rejuvenate, SP1, Spectrum, mycorrhizal products primarily as a seed coat. And then we do sap analysis on the growing crops to see where we are. Hopefully they won't call back. And then we'll do foliars if it's bad enough that it needs to be corrected.
Great, thank you.
Rick, if that's a sales call, feel free to take it, man.
Season.
I'm good.
I'm gonna pivot to Haley.
Oh, they can't call.
Oh. Thanks, Rick.
All right, so we've got some questions in the chat. The first one, has anyone used bird's foot trefoil as a cover crop? We did some trials one year when we had permanent beds. After snow peas, we planted some beds with rye vetch, some with bird's foot trefoil, and some with rye grass and peas. The bird's foot trefoil beds had the most nitrogen in early June when we spaded all of the cover crops under to plant broccoli for fall harvest. So has anyone used bird's foot trefoil?
We've used it at our farm in Dansville. We grow some hay and some forages, not intentionally as a cover crop, but plowed it down and then a veg crop or a grain crop after, with good results.
Anybody else?
And yep, anyone else?
I have not tried it, but given those results, I'm interested and definitely something that can be looked at.
Great. So for Josh, what is your market for all of those beets?
Love beets.
Yeah, Western New York is blessed with a very large organic beet processor.
Yep.
Which I'm very jealous of, because I would just want to grow beets all day.
And then we have a couple of questions about municipal compost. So is the municipal compost free of pollutants? And are you testing for trace metals when adding municipal leaf litter?
I got a few complete soil tests from Dairy One. I don't recall. I believe it was pretty clean. I don't believe that I tested for trace elements, but I've been using it for several years and I haven't seen any issues that would lead to me to think that. It's essentially leaves and wood chips and like trees, so I can see the point source pretty easily when I go down there. It's a big pile of wood chips and leaf bags. I think the only issue for it becomes occasionally plastic pots or crap from people's yards get in there. So I might pull a bag of trash out for every couple of dump truck loads, which is annoying, but you know, people are people. But I think that the benefits outweigh any sort of issues. And I think in general, people aren't dumping paint in their leaf bags. So I feel pretty good about it. But I think with any fertility source that from off the farm, you know, you don't know what you're going to get.
I would be concerned about Phytophthora if they're picking up municipal stuff from along the street and people have thrown their rotten pumpkins in there.
Yeah. It has been composted for like several years too. So I don't know if that would remove Phytophthora or other stuff, but
No, it's cold.
don't have Phytophthora yet. Cross your fingers.
It's a good point though. You just terrified me of leaf litter. Ooh.
Yeah. I know it's too bad that there's not a you know, better source of low fertility compost like that. I wish I could get a unending stream of wood chips, but I just don't seem to be one of those lucky farmers who is on a arborist's path, so gotta pay for it.
Bummer.
We have a follow-up from Elizabeth Henderson saying that bird's foot trefoil has replaced black medic in many roadside strips and seems to do well in extremes of weather, dry and wet. So that's interesting. And then we have another question. What about mushroom compost, to Aaron?
Yeah, we've used mushroom compost before. I've had that soil tested as well. Generally, it's just horse compost that's been mushrooms have been grown on, so it has a similar fertility profile, and it's very expensive compared to local sources of compost. Even when I was getting it, it was a backhaul from the horse facility in upstate New York, and they brought it down to Pennsylvania, and then on the backhaul they would bring us mushroom compost, and it was still more expensive to do because Pennsylvania tractor trailer regulations they're only allowed to carry 25 tons in a tractor trailer, whereas in New York, they're allowed to carry, I believe, 35. So that made it more expensive. And my municipal compost plus the horse compost from down the road is very free and very cheap to haul. So that made the difference for us.
I tried it for a couple of years, but decided that between the cost of the trucking and the cost of the spreading, it didn't cover the value. The value of it cover the cost.
Apparently in Pennsylvania, they put it on their fields with bulldozers. So if you live in Pennsylvania, it's a good bet. But I think if you're not near the source of the mushroom compost, it's less exciting.
All right, any other questions?
Looks like we've done it. So maybe in the last 5 minutes, I'll just ask the panel if there's any lessons learned or advice that you'd like to share. Any last thoughts before we thank you and close it all up? And I'll just open it to anybody that has a thought.
I guess my biggest thought or advice is things like, we talked about rye and stuff. Stop what you're doing to not let it get away from you, because it'll be worth it in the end. Don't let these things turn. We got enough weed problems. Don't let good things turn into weeds.
It was so dry. Spring, we had one field of rye that I just didn't get to on time, and it really sucked the moisture out of the ground. And it gotten woodier than I like, and so then it's a real nightmare trying to till that stuff in. And we were planting transplanted cabbage into that field, so my planter goes through a lot of trash, but then it makes cultivation difficult because our first pass usually is with a finger weeder or tine weeder, and tine weeders don't like trash.
I thought that was just me, so good to know everyone else is having that problem.
Takes a lot of patience.
Yeah, I was just going to say that for folks who are just getting started with cover cropping, the $35 bag seeder from Sauter's Produce Supply has worked great for us for a number of years, and we just bought a drill this year. Or last year, but for many years I went out there with the bag seeder and turned it and spread a 16-foot swath at a time, and it's great exercise. And if you can follow it with a Perfecta to work it into the soil, you get great stands, and it's a great beginner's way to get into cover cropping, because I think all of the machinery here that's being discussed is really expensive and really intimidating to get into when the cover crop is not necessarily contributing to your overall income for that year. So it can be hard to justify the costs. And a $35 bag seeder and your existing cultivation equipment can do a lot to help you get into cover cropping and start to see the benefits, which can then let you, buy a Weed Warrior or some insane piece of metal that will help you do it more effectively at a larger scale. So, don't be intimidated by the machinery. I think you can do it on a much smaller scale with simple equipment.
I agree with that a lot. We had a field, that same field I spoke of that we had the bindweed issue. We finished harvesting table beets in the snow. It must have been around the 25th or so in November last year. We went out with our Langtoll lime spreader and broadcast triticale for a cover crop. We combined it 2 weeks ago with 75 bushel triticale. Planted in November as a cover crop. So we've got a, like I said, very expensive, fancy no-till 40-foot grain drill, and those yields didn't compare to the broadcast in the end of November triticale. So nothing scientific behind it. It just worked out that way. Really simple.
Very cool.
Talking about triticale, we have a question for Josh and Rick. Do you have a problem marketing your triticale as a grain?
We have no problem because we feed it to our chickens. We grind it and feed it in the ration to the organic chickens.
And I don't grow it, and I didn't have a problem because I don't grow it. But not that I don't like triticale. What I've seen, it's a very healthy and vigorous crop. Gives you good yields, and it's a good forage. But I've already got 3 different grains, and I just don't have enough grain bins to store it all. So that's the bottleneck, is enough storage space.
If people are having trouble, we've decided that starting this fall, we're going to plant 100% triticale. So we will be looking to buy organic triticale for chicken feed. If marketing's an issue for people, give us a call.
Nice. Well, we are pretty much at our time right now.